Welcome back to the Adapt or Die podcast. I'm your host with the most, Armel Tala.
And I'm your host on the low, Ben Smith. This podcast is focused on one thing, finding practical ways to improve your health, wealth, and happiness.
As I like to say, you only peak once you stop trying. Thanks for joining us in our journey of lifelong learning.
And now it's time for the next episode of
The Adapt or Die podcast. Welcome back. It has been a long time for us. You guys have, for y'all, the break would have been like a while ago.
Like a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, it should be a couple weeks ago. I should have been posting consistently. For us, we took a break in between. This is the first episode recorded in like 3 weeks.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. So it's been too long.
It has been a minute.
I'm happy we're back. What any new things have happened in between then, Ben?
Nothing in particular, honestly. No, nothing crazy.
It's just been school.
Yeah,
just like the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, no. Last week, Mel, he texted me. He called me or whatever, and he was like, bro, like we can't record this week. I have like 6 exams. I was like, dang.
He's like, I'm not even taking 6 classes, but I had 6 exams somehow. So, but you know, life of a college student. We're almost done. We're almost out, but we thugging it through. We working on interesting things. But time to talk about probably one of the most interesting books. This is part 2. I don't know what I'm going to title this because I always like to give the title something that's like, people be like, ooh, I want to read that. But it's probably just going to be like.
I mean, he titled it
Great.
How to Get Rich.
It's just a great title.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't.
Welcome back to How to Get Rich part 2. And what is the roadmap for today?
Wow. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about leverage, accountability, and judgment. Some of the big parts on finishing off with specific knowledge. And then on the back half, we're going to talk about foundational knowledge and kind of an assortment of things to allow anyone to like kind of like the foundations of becoming wealthy and where that starts off. So a lot of stuff though. This is it's a beast of an episode. I'm not gonna lie.
Best information you'll get. You guys should really read the book. The book is The Almanack of Naval Ravikant by Jorgenson.
Jorgenson? I don't know.
Something like that. But let's get it rolling. Leverage.
So last episode we talked about ownership, and I'm saying that because my outline says so. I don't know. It was a long time before our last episode, but we talked about ownership, and the reason ownership is important is because if you own something, you bear the risk of failure, but you also reap the rewards of success, right? So one idea that's really hand in hand with ownership is leverage. Okay, so ownership works because your business gives society what it wants but doesn't know how to get, right? And society gives you value or money in return for giving it what it needs or wants. One piece that's missing though is scale. And so no matter how good your product or whatever you're producing or giving out to society is, if you can't sell it to a large number of people, or if you can't scale it up massively, you're never going to build wealth with it. And that's where leverage comes in. So we talked about getting ownership, but a big component is actually scaling up your business, and leverage is how you do that.
And there are 3 types of leverage, and you've probably heard of the first, and that is number 1 is labor. I'm actually going to run through all 3, and then we'll identify each. First one is labor, second is capital, and third is products with no marginal cost of replication. So labor, this is what you think about when you have other people working for you. Examples are someone that owns a restaurant and then they're paying the chef to cook the food and the servers to serve the food. And then a cashier, Walmart employing probably the most amount of cashiers, which I went to Walmart today and they're getting rid of them. Everything's like self-checkout. So remember, if you're working for someone, that's what happens. That's why you got to own a business. So labor is paying someone, and this is the oldest form, and this is something that might impress your parents. Like, look, I have 5 people that are working for me. But this is the worst type of leverage, to be very clear. And we'll go into it, but you're paying someone else to work for you, and it's the worst because managing people gets messy, and you also need great leadership skills. That doesn't mean you can't have those great leadership skills, but it adds additional skills to the stress of what you have to deal with when you're running a business. And I think a quote that Naval has here, a thing that Naval says is, "You're one short hop from mutiny or getting eaten or torn apart by the mob." And so if you do people wrong, it's very easy for people not to like you. Now, the second is capital. This is this other type of leverage. So if we think labor was the very first type of leverage, building the pyramids, the oldest form of how people really got wealthy. Now, the second is capital. And now you're thinking about bankers. You're thinking about even corrupt politicians, people that are capital allocators, also like CEOs. And so this past leverage is very dominant. It was it's most dominant in the recent years, in the past century to think about, mainly because money is kind of like this newer idea that we really like come to understand and come to like productize. An example of this is like Warren Buffett. And so essentially, this is any form of investing, stocks, real estate, and this is leverage that you're using, because this is what people mean when they say you want your money to be working for you, is in when you invest money in something, you don't have to do the work. That money being invested is you're giving it to someone else that's going to do the work and spend that money well. And so that's the second type. And then the third is the newest form of leverage, and this is products with no marginal cost of replication. And so you can think about books, media, movies, and code. And so what does this no marginal cost of replication mean? It means you have to just think about a book. You write it once, but then it can be mass produced and given out to so many people. The Bible, for example, media, movies, people pirate them, and code being probably the most impactful new form of leverage out there. And this is where all the new fortunes are made, from Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon, Google. For those that don't know, the founders of Google, their name are Larry and Sergey. Most people actually don't know that.
Really?
Yeah, most people have zero clue who the founders are. And it's because it's like they weren't even the CEOs, and it's a very complicated story.
Right.
But also, I mean, big tech and code. That's why code is such a great form of leverage, just because at the scale at which you can get at. But you also have to think about Joe Rogan and PewDiePie, and that's the media, that's the YouTubers. They're using this new form of leverage to make a lot of money, and a lot of people know that because a lot of them flex it. But so this is the best form of leverage because zero cost to replicate. You make one video, but a million people can watch it. You make one movie, a bunch of people can watch it. You make one software product, a bunch of people can use it, right? And it's permissionless. This is the biggest part, is that it is permissionless. Labor, it requires people to allow you. It requires people to follow you. Capital, people must give you money. But code and making YouTube videos, making podcasts like we're doing, it's essentially free as long as you're willing to put up the capital yourself to buy. No one's going to stop you from buying a microphone. No one's going to stop you from going to learn how to code on one of those free websites. So it is the best form because it is permissionless. And so the point here is wealth requires owning businesses at scale. Scale requires leverage, and the best leverage is code and media.
Now, an important concept to go along with leverage is accountability. And so Mel talked about how code is the best form of leverage. And that is true because it is permissionless and zero marginal cost of replication, right? But to be able to scale anything, you are going to have to use capital and labor at some point. They are inevitable. If you think about the biggest companies like Facebook, Google, like those tech companies, like they're leveraging code to the max, but they also have to have a large number of employees and a lot of capital to be able to grow the way they did and sustain themselves. So capital and labor aren't irrelevant. They are important, but they're just not important in the beginning, and they're not usually where you'd want to start in today's age, right? Now, like I said, accountability is really important to go along with leverage because, as Mel said, if you want to gain labor leverage, you have to convince people to follow you. And if you want to get capital leverage, you have to convince people to give you money, and that requires credibility. It requires that you have a reputation such that people will trust in your judgment to follow you or trust in your judgment to give you money, right? And that's really important. So you, in that sense, you really need to be accountable for what you do, and you need to have a track record, a reputation that allows people to look at what you've done and say, I trust Ben or I trust Mel to the extent that I will give them money or follow them or give them, my energy, to, how do I say this? Just to participate in whatever endeavors that they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so, what is accountability defined? It is essentially some form of ownership. It is a record of your accomplishments. So, again, think of situations where you bear the risk of failure, but you also reap the rewards of success. So, ownership and accountability are very synonymous, but accountability is more about your reputation, while ownership is more about stake.
And I think a simple way to think about this is accountability is who is, when Ben talks about ownership, is like who is responsible for this thing, and you are the person to blame when it goes wrong.
Right, exactly. I think this. So Naval gives a very lengthy example in the podcast that he has over this, but I think it's really good. So we're going to go through it because it gives a good idea of what we mean by the degrees of accountability, the degrees of leverage, and also the degrees of specific knowledge and how that works. And so his example is in real estate. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up in terms of lowest accountability to highest accountability. And so we start is with day laborers. So these are people who are working in the construction industry. They are the people who basically do the dirty work, right? They put shingles in the house. They build the frames. They're the people that are told what and how to do it, right? And they just go do it. They actually execute the work, but they're not accountable for what they do. If the customer has an issue, they're not going to go directly to any one of the day laborers and ask them why their house is not being built a certain way, right? They're going to go to a general contractor, right? And that's the next step up. They're going to go to the general contractor and say, hey, I need something, this needs to be done a different way, right? Or I don't like how this was done, or like, why did this get done this way? And so a general contractor has more accountability in that if something goes wrong, they will have to be accountable for that. So if they go over budget, they'll have to pay for that. Or on the same token, if they are paid and they actually go under budget, so they save a lot of money, they get to reap the profit from that, right? And that is where the accountability comes in. And so that's a good step up, but an even further step up would be a property developer. So these are people who not only are they, so a general contractor is someone who renovates a house, right? But a property developer will actually go through a neighborhood and say, how much is this house worth? And what they do is they try to find houses or homes or just property in general that is undervalued. And they want to, wipe that away, build something new or renovate it themselves, but they're actually buying the property. And because of that, they're much more accountable and they try to create more value that way. But it's pretty risky. If you've ever seen like home shows or whatever, like you can lose a lot of money if you don't do it right. Of course, on TV, they always do it right, but that's just because like it's TV, you can lose hundreds of thousands. And actually, if you've like read books on real estate, like you can lose a lot of money.
Really?
It's like a lot of people have like started in real estate and like they'll buy some condos or something and they just get destroyed. I think my dad did that when he was young.
People make it seem so easy. They're like, real estate is just, no, nothing is easy.
Yeah. And so in that scenario, right, so the general contractor, they were using labor as a form of leverage. So they had people working for them, but the property developer was also using capital and labor. So sorry, I kind of missed that point. But so going one step up from a property developer would be like an architect or a famous developer. So someone who essentially has become so well known for building buildings or their work that people will pay extra just to have them work on it because they know that it's a guarantee that their home will be a certain way or a certain style or it'll be worth more. It's kind of like art in a way. But that's another step up because if that architect does a bad job, their reputation is ruined. And going forward, they really lose a lot of the leverage and the accountability that they gained from their previous work.
And I think the key point here is the accountability they had from their previous work built up a reputation that allowed them to charge more than the market would normally pay. And if they ruin something that they're accountable to, it ruins their reputation and therefore ruins the amount they can charge. So this is kind of the idea of accountability, but there's more.
So you can actually go even further. I know there's a lot of tiers here. You become a massive developer. This is like, I don't know why, it's like a strange term to say, but essentially think of someone who like, instead of just trying to develop a home, so just finding underpriced or undervalued homes and developing them, think about trying to go out to basically areas of the city that where like no one lives yet, and then developing an entire suburb. So like planning a whole suburb, planning out where all the shopping stuff's going to go, like basically planning like a little city, right? That's like a massive developer, and that takes, I mean, that takes a lot of accountability and a lot of leverage to be able to do, right? You need a lot of people working on that. You need a lot of capital to be able to carry that out. And you need a lot of credibility to be able to even get to that point, right? So there's a lot to be rewarded because people will pay a lot of money. There's a lot of people who will pay, hundreds of thousands for their homes. But if you fail, you're in big trouble. Even well, this is kind of the same level, but this is in a different arena. It's called an REIT, which is a real estate investment trust, I believe is what it's called. And instead of utilizing labor so much to build out a whole little city like a massive developer might do, you're actually more of a finance person. And so what you do is you create these large pools of money to invest in massive developers. This could be a high-rise building, it could be a suburb, whatever, and they do the work for you, but you give them the capital necessary to be able to do that. But that takes skill as well, because if that massive developer doesn't work, or their plan doesn't follow through properly, you're going to lose all your money, and that's not good for anything.
And so we've covered labor and we've covered capital, but now this is where the marginal cost of using something that has a marginal cost to replicate becomes insanely leverageable.
The big daddy of them all, a real estate tech company. And so when you put together labor and capital and you combine tech into it, instead of just having, any of the things we've talked about previously, you get this kind of ultimate potential of a company. And this winds up looking something similar to a Trulia or a Zillow or a Redfin type of company, where you're essentially leveraging code and tech to do what real estate investment trusts are doing and massive developers, but on a massive scale, and doing that in a way that would be impossible without computers. I'm not too sure about the ins and outs of like how this works, but he went over it, and I was like, do you have any ideas on how this works exactly?
In terms of how specifically like Zillow does it, or why?
Yeah, like, are they using like algorithms to find like where the undervalued homes are? Is what they're doing?
Yeah, so essentially it's like you have these different developers, these different, contractors, but what Zillow does is like it aggregates almost all the information into one and also uses algorithms to parse all that data in order to find like, the undervalued properties, because they know what every house around it costs. So then, do some quick maths and you're like, yeah, this one's, below the price that most people should pay. And so, but if you didn't have code to do this, you would be spending so much money on paying someone, an analyst or someone, to go through that data and do the calculations themselves and go look at all the different homes in that place. When it's like at Zillow, they're leveraging other people. Like they're using leverage to leverage. They're using leverage on top of leverage, right? They're leveraging people that are going to upload their house on there, take the pictures, where it's like it takes out that work of needing to go there and then see it. So a lot of the jobs before gets kind of like all aggregated into this one easy place where people can just find that information. And that's how it turns out to being significant rewards of what billions of dollars in revenue compared to like what a massive developer could do.
That was a great explanation. Thank you, Mel. And just one thing to note is that like this is like also the maximum accountability as well. So this is a company that people, if you're founding this type of company, you would dedicate your life to it, but you could lose everything, right? Because if you fail, I mean, you could, you can always start another business, but people will see that and it will be on your track record, and you'll probably go bankrupt and have to start over, right?
And I think the accountability here is like with the massive developers, it's like, or those real estate, like they have to, be accountable to shareholders and the people that make it. But now you're talking just the scale, because code allows you to scale where the accountability is the same with everybody else, but now it's at scale. It's not just like one city. Now it's multiple cities, and, people rely on Zillow to look up houses and connect with, what people do on Zillow. I haven't actually used it too much. I have a high overview of it, but it's like, it's just the scale that increases this accountability.
Right. And just to cap off that example, you can really see the layers of like how accountability builds. So we start from like a day laborer, and then, we move up to general contractor, and then, developers, architect, and then finish off with a massive tech company. Like there's huge degrees and varying degrees of accountability, but also the use of leverage in that, right? Because of accountability, like they're tied together. You can't get leverage without accountability, but using leverage will also create more accountability. Um, and then also there's a vast amount of specific knowledge that's involved with that, right? Because if you're a general contractor, you need to know the ins and outs of how to build a house. Or if you're a massive developer, you need to know what goes on to actually create a suburb or to create a high rise. And especially if you're a real estate investment trust, or if you're a large tech company, you need to understand the stock market as well as the tech part of all of that, and understand the housing market. So there's a lot of specific knowledge that goes into that when you're combining those parts and using them as well.
And so that's a lot about leverage. So to build wealth, you need to own a scaled business, and that requires leverage. And leverage comes with accountability. And the last part is all of this requires risk taking and specific knowledge along the way. So, I guess what I'm trying to really highlight here is that there's so much that you can get out of using leverage in terms of failure and reward. But the thing is, what separates people that do it and don't is exactly what I said. Those that do it and take the risk. And so, like we mentioned, the best leverage is code and media, and that's because it's permissionless, zero cost of replication, and like we said before, like you'll more likely need capital and labor in the future to also make it even bigger. But this requires taking risks. Like taking risk is necessary. Like you don't build wealth with a secure position. Like you don't build wealth by staying in a 9 to 5 job that tells you how much you're going to get paid. And taking risk has actually never been like unrisky if you think about it now. Like if you fail horribly, let's say you go bankrupt, you don't go to jail for bankrupting investors, and you don't die of hunger. Especially if you're going to you start like a software company. Like if you try to start a software company, go bankrupt, you can just go turn around and get a software engineering job or work in tech, and like you'll be perfectly fine and you won't go starving, right? And then last is, especially if you're young, like what do you have to lose, right? Time is the most valuable thing we have. And when you're young and you have so much time in your hand, and most people don't actually know what they want to do with their time, but they always think like, I want to make money. It's like, why haven't you tried to start a business? And so all of this leverage, trying to build wealth, it requires you to use leverage, it requires you to take on responsibility, have accountability. The last and not least is you got to take the risk. So it's one thing to preach it, it's another to do it.
Well said. Now, moving on from leverage, the next thing we're going to hit on is judgment. And so the main skills we've talked about so far are finding and building out your specific knowledge, as well as gaining ownership or accountability and using leverage. Okay. The final skill is judgment. And what is judgment? I really like the way he defines this. It is knowing the long-term consequences of your actions, but not necessarily in an internal way, like not like your personal relationships. It's more of like, what are the long-term consequences of my actions for my business, or what are the like for, it's more of the external view of that. And so he kind of juxtaposes wisdom and judgment as, wisdom is long-term consequences of personal actions, and judgment is kind of the external sphere. So dealing with anything business related, creating a company, things like of that nature. And so why is judgment important? Well, it's because it's a force multiplier for your leverage, right? One of our friends mentioned this a couple of days ago. He was talking about how he's sometimes he puts his head down and he just works so hard, and he doesn't come back up and just try to think about what he's doing for a second. And he thinks, if he can just outwork everyone, it'll all fall in place. And maybe you'll be all right if you outwork everyone, but if you're using leverage, you're not going to get the maximum benefit if you're not using it the correct way. So the quality of your decisions are extremely important, particularly when you're using leverage, right? And that's because if you can make the best decision with the maximum amount of leverage, that's gonna do more for you than anything else you could possibly do. Even just straight up like working hard or working as much as possible, right? Because the leverage will outwork, or it'll the output will be far greater from the leverage and the quality of the decision, like much more than any of the quantity of work that you could do, right? Does that make sense, or am I just going off on a tangent there?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
like if you can if you can allocate money to the right thing using leverage, like I guess an example, the easiest example to use is like financial. And when we talk about leverage, we're not talking about like, we're not specifically talking about like the financial leverage that you get from you getting margin or like, taking on debt to buy something more. But if you do get money from investors that you didn't have before, you are going to make more money than if you just invested your own money, because there was more money to be put towards something. You made it multiply by a lot more. The pie grew, so you get a bigger cut of it than only using your own capital. I think that's what you're trying to say. And then the other thing about leverages and judgment is that you make good judgment, amazing outcome. And you make terrible judgment, because you're using leverage, the outcome is even worse. It's even more pain. It's painful to lose your money, but it's even more painful to lose other people's money. And when it's at the scale of maybe like millions of dollars. So that's the.
Yeah, no, that's good. And one thing Naval kind of touches on with leverage and judgment is that you spend the first chunk of your life getting leverage. Leverage is really difficult to get, right? To get people to trust you enough to give you capital or follow you, give you their labor. That's extremely difficult. So, if you can, you'd want to use code or media, because that's permissionless. And it's a much better form to start off with. But it takes a while to get leverage. It takes a while just to even have accountability in life. But once you do get that leverage, you want to focus on slowing down and just making the right decisions, which is judgment, right? Because in the beginning, you just have a little sailboat, right? It's just you, and you don't really have much to lose. So you can just work as hard as you can at getting that leverage. But once you've built that leverage up, you're now you're in an ocean liner, right? And you need to be very careful about where you go, because if that ocean liner crashes, it's not just going to affect you; it's going to affect everyone. It's going to affect the whole ecosystem around you, right? And so that's hugely detrimental. But you also have the potential to make extremely positive effects on society using the leverage and your judgment, right? So here's a quote that kind of goes over leverage that I like. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world, by Archimedes. And that's just kind of emphasizing the power of leverage and the necessity of judgment to use that power, right?
And so when you're thinking about leverage, again, finance is probably the easiest way to think about it, just because when you think leverage, is like you're taking on more capital. One thing I wanted to add is about spending a lot of time gaining the leverage. Some people are like, well, I thought you said code and stuff is permissionless and making media is permissionless. Why are you saying it takes that still also takes a lot of time? It's because to learn how to code and to learn how to make good videos that can actually build that leverage takes time as well. So it's permissionless where you can start, but there is not, just because it's permissionless doesn't mean it's easy. But so a perfect example of transitioning judgment and leverage is like Warren Buffett. And a quote that Warren Buffett says is, or is this Warren Buffett? No, this isn't Warren Buffett. This is Naval. So
Yeah.
Naval says, we waste our time with short-term thinking and busy work. Warren Buffett spends a year deciding and a day acting. That act lasts decades. So Warren Buffett gets paid purely for his judgment. And that's because he's just an investor. He just thinks about what companies to invest in, but he leverages immense amount of capital. And he's built so much like specific knowledge, and has so much experience in the game of investing, that like he's able to use his judgment and make the best decisions, and is like constantly making really, really good decisions about what to invest in. And so Naval says that Buffett is where you like want to be. And that's where like your inputs are highly disconnected from your outputs. Like what this means is, because if you spend 8 hours, like if you work on an hourly wage, you spend 8 hours, you're gonna get paid 8 hours worth of work. But if you're someone that owns a business, or you're someone that gets paid for the output and not how much you actually put into it, so like Warren Buffett, he gets paid on how well an investment does. Well, he doesn't have to go spend hours. Like he spends hours like reading and finding those investments, but he's not actually doing any like physical work, or he's not based on the hourly. Like if he could find an investment in the first day of him looking for one that would multiply the return, then that's it. He's, it doesn't matter. It's completely disconnected. Sometimes it takes him years to find it, but there is no connection between how much he's getting paid for his work and how much he's actually putting in. And that's the point you want to get at. And that's where you've gotten to the point where you're actually in the realm of getting wealthy or wealthy. But so there's two important points on judgment. The first is judgment without experience is like useless, right? It's like, okay, I guess the best way to put it's like maybe you can like put up hours and hours in the gym, but now I gotta go back. I was trying to not use a basketball reference, but like I can only do basketball references. So you put in hours and hours in the gym, getting shots up, but then like you've never played a basketball game before. So then the first time stepping up, it's like, okay, that's great. You can make a bunch of shots, but like you literally don't understand anything else about playing basketball. So that's just an example. But quote here is intellect without any experience is often worse than is off is intellect without any experience is often worse than useless, because you get the confidence that the intellect gives you and you get some of the credibility, but because you had no skin in the game and you had no real experience and no real accountability, you're just throwing darts. So the real world is highly complex. It's impossible to just because you're smart doesn't mean you're going to understand the world, because a lot of things that happen in the world can be counterintuitive. And so you need to gain experience. And the thing Naval says is, because we often hear that 10,000 hours is what you need to master something, but he goes 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours isn't enough. You want 10,000 iterations. The quantity and the quality of your experiences matter. And so it's like asking yourself, like, what did you learn? What new things did you try? How many different ideas did you implement? This one's really big, and we're going to talk about that more. And then second one is the least emotional people have the best judgment. And I don't think should be bring a new thing to anybody.
Surprise, surprise.
Like, if you're upset, you're not going to make the best decisions, and we've kind of all been there. And so like, but I really like the way, I don't know if you wrote this or you just kind of like took it from Naval, but what Ben has in his notes is emotions equals, because he's very lazy, but emotions equal what you want reality to be instead of what it actually is. I think that's just like a beautiful way of actually kind of understanding emotions. It's like you feel a certain way about something should be, like your emotions, like this should just be this, or people should have this, but it's disconnected from reality. And the best decisions are grounded in reality. And many of the best investors can come off as robotic, but this is just simply the nature of making really good judgments. And the more outraged a person is, the worse the judgment. And Naval says, if someone's constantly tweeting political outrage, just see like an angry person getting into fights. You don't want to hand this person the keys to your car, let alone the keys to your company. Yep. That was a lot on the first. This is just, we're just halfway through, y'all.
Yeah. I told you guys, this is a monster episode.
But now we're on to the debrief of this pod. Probably some of our favorite section where we just get to talk about.
Yeah, so he said something, and I didn't know what to make of it. It kind of threw me off when he said it. He said that and it was kind of in passing. It wasn't like a point, but something to the effect of, I don't think a small business owner or a restaurant owner works any less than Elon Musk. Like Elon Musk works they work just as hard as Elon Musk. And I was like, I don't know. What do you think of that statement? Like, how true is it? And what, where's the discrepancy coming from?
Yeah, no, this highlights what he talks about with leverage and what you're working on. So I think it's true, because if you think about it, because my dad, he is a small business owner, right? And also my mom now, she's also starting a lot of like health related businesses, like home health, and then now she's trying to start like a clinic or whatever. So it's very interesting seeing both of my parents be very entrepreneurial here. But so my dad, he works like insanely hard. Like this man is there like all day from like 12 hours a day, 12, 14 hours like at his at his grocery store, like spending all the time like talking to customers, helping them buy things, doing whatever is in the background, and I got to spend time seeing him do that during like my sophomore going to junior year of high school. And I was having to work 12 hours, and I like to tell this, sir, 12 hours a day for $30 a day.
Yeah. Oh, that's an important point. $30 a day.
Not an hour,
A
a day. And so he's working really hard, man, like putting a lot of hours. And is he spending it the most efficiently? I don't know really, but what makes Elon Musk worth so much more is just the aim, what he's working on, like in the leverage that he has of taking in investors' money to build something really, really big, right? And that's the key difference here. And Naval stresses it, so I'm not stressing anything new, but it's like that's why it's so important to dream big. Like you can work really, really hard, but if you're working on something that's just not gonna scale, that's just not scalable, and that's why it's important. That's why we highlighted that it's got to be a business that can do something at scale. You're gonna get what you're working on, right? And working on a small business, if you're successful at that's good for most people. Like that's good for like everyone, really.
That's not, you don't need anymore like that.
Yeah, and it's like, and a lot of times is if you just want to make money, it's like easier thing to do is actually just go work at a small business. Like if you wanted to build like $1 billion company, but just because you wanted to make money, that's probably a horrible thing, because it's like you got to be more passionate about what you're working on, because the road to doing something bigger is a lot riskier. There's a lot more accountability. Like just think about how much Elon gets poo-pooed on like social media and just the public in general, just because he's done something, has become really, really successful because he did something really big. But the person that's really successful owning a small business, they don't get the same rhetoric, because they just not in the public. But Elon and like that small business owner think the same about a lot of things, because they're both business people. They say they have the same kind of economic view of like less government, less regulation on things that are just slowing things down. So I think in this statement, simply put it, it's like they are working just like they're honestly working just as hard, but the problems at which they're solving are different. The difficulty of what they're solving are different, and therefore that's why there's a difference in like the pay. And I think it's like obviously, and I think that's just fair. If you're working on something more difficult, you should be rewarded than working on something that's easier, right? And so,
Right.
What do you think?
No, I think I agree with what you said totally. When he said that, it just threw me for such a loop initially, because it was always like, if I'm putting in, I can outwork anyone. A lot of people say that, but it's like, like it's that feeling of like, I would feel satisfied based on my inputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like that's not really, like, just by going off this example, like clearly your inputs, if you're doing it right, shouldn't be correlated to your outputs. When I say doing it right, I mean that depends on your goal and like what you're trying to do. But it's much more important to get what you do right than not how you do it. But like it's much more like the most important thing is getting what you're doing correct. If you don't get that right, nothing else matters. Like it just doesn't, like nothing matters. It's just not going to work.
And to highlight there, it's like what you're doing doesn't have to be the size, the scale at Elon, right?
Right.
Like you just have to figure out what is right for you. Maybe it is just a small business, which is very respectable, and it's like you should do that. But maybe you want to do even bigger, right? But it's like make sure you're not limiting yourself. And I thought of maybe this is because I'm a math person, but the best way to think of like your inputs, your outputs, right? It's like think about the function. So I'm gonna get a little mathy here, and then I'll try to use like a general term. So let's say you have a function. It's just like it's literally just let's say x squared to make it seem like it's even big, right? Let's say it's x squared. So you have f of x equals x. And the x is your input, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you put in 1, you put in 2, you go 1 is 1, 2 2 squares 4, 4 you 16. You're going somewhere, right? The more inputs you put in, like the bigger the number, right? And so this is a very simple function. You can think of x or x squared. Now, plug that into an exponential function, or e to the power of x. Or you can just think 2 to the power of your input. And so the example I'm using here is that the vehicle, what you're inputting into, matters a lot more than the actual input itself. If I'm putting 2 into x squared, I'm going to get 4. If I'm putting 2, I was going to say into 2 squared, but that would be the same thing. But if I'm putting 2 into e squared, like
it's more, but yeah, but especially if
it's
you
way
scale
more.
it more, right? Like if
It's,
like at the more like the initial difference is negligible for the most part, but as you scale the input, the function that you're using is gonna create all the difference.
and just plot it in a graph. Plot x squared and an
How did we
exponential,
get? How did
and
we
you'll see that. But the simple way of putting this is like the vehicle at which you're putting in all that work into matters more. If you're gonna put a lot of work into, beat up, Honda Civic, the car can get you pretty far, but like after a while it's gonna, it's gonna crash. But if you're putting a lot of work into like a brand new, really nice Ferrari, you're gonna be able to go a lot further with it. So that's a simpler way of putting it. But my question to you, Ben, is so we talk about judgment, and we say in order to have judgment, you need to gain experience. But how does one know if they're getting the right quantity and the right quality of experience that will help improve their judgment? And so we're both young here, so we don't actually have a great answer for it. But in terms of like, and because this is something we're both figuring out, and that's why I asked this question, is like we want to make sure that we're getting the right quantity and also the right quality, right? So, but how do you know if you're like getting that?
That's a really tough question. I saw that written down and I was like, oh no. Like it's like one of those questions where you're like, like I don't even know if I'm qualified to answer this, but I'll do my best because it's a good exercise to go through, and I think it's an interesting question. Um, I think one of the first things that's important when analyzing, how much judgment, or there's two parts: the quantity of the judgment and the quality, right? So both of those things are going to be dependent on what you're trying to get judgment in, right? So and the first thing we're going to talk about this more here in a second is just like getting just a foundational knowledge base of what people in the field or whatever you're trying to do, like what is the foundational knowledge just to allow me to like gain experience? Like what is it that other people who have done similar things to what I'm trying to do, where did they start? Just trying to figure out like what has been the historical precedent and trying to get some data points on like what that might look like. But it's like such a difficult question because it's like, well, like it depends on the industry and it depends on who you are and like what your background is, because like I think if someone like I read Elon's biography, right, and he was just like he was always coding like from like since he was like 12, like just like naturally, right, and it's like was he like thinking like, oh, like I need to get this experience for like to be able to create a company and that I'll use that money to like build this other company. It's like no, he was just doing it because he liked it. So it's like it's really difficult to say like where that judgment and that experience is going to come from to build that judgment. I think one of the best reservoirs is going to be books, right? But just that's going to get you started on like where you should be starting, but a lot of it's going to be like you going out and trying things and like seeing if it clicks or not, and then having to kind of come back and recircle back and analyzing on how good your models that you've developed through your experience are working in the real world. I know it's kind of like a vague answer, but I like to be honest, it's like it's difficult. Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's like what I'm doing right now to know if I'm getting the right quantity and quality of experience. So like when you're young, like you said, you can't. Most people aren't thinking, especially if you're like just before you're 18. A lot of your thoughts aren't like, oh, I want to reach financial freedom or I want to do X, Y, Z. It's more related to just the current moment, which is good because you should live in the moment. But right now, once you get to the age where you like figure out what you want to do and you want to say like I want to be like a Warren Buffett, I want to get that type of experience, but how do I know I'm getting the right quality and quantity of experience? And I think you just ask, and I think that's really
Interesting.
simple. You just ask the people that are doing it. Like I asked a bunch of software engineers like what should I be doing, and they tell you. They're like okay. And it's like books is like the same thing. Books are permissionless asking, where you can just go and like read the biographies like, oh, that's what Elon did. Okay, I should probably be somewhere similar. And you begin to gauge where you are compared to the other person. And if you understand yourself, you understand, okay, well, this person's probably a lot smarter than me, so I need to put in a little bit more work than them. Or this person, they just, they don't comprehend this as fast as I do, so I can like, so by asking questions and by seeking what other people did, that's gonna help I guess. And I think that was just, I think I came to that right when we were like, I actually didn't even think about it before posing this question. It's just like right when we're recording, I was like, it's the thing I just do is like, I'll just ask older people like, what do you regret? What do you wish you would have done differently? And then I'll just
Yeah.
tell you.
No, that's a really good answer, because like, yeah, I mean, when you think about like what do you like, how much and what do you need to learn, like the people who will know are the people who have done that, right? So it's like the only way like is to go figure out what they did, and one of the best ways is just to ask them.
Yeah.
And I guess my like my initial answer was like books, but I think asking them is much more direct and effective, and then supplement with books, because you can extract kind of like a a pattern between a lot of people across the like different um just completely different domains or different industries and what they did, and kind of figure out like what that often looks like through like biographies or books or things like that. So
Yeah. And I think like too, and the last point is the right quantity. It's almost like more is better. But then the big problem that you want to think about why quantity becomes a question of like, well, wouldn't more just always be better? So why is that even a question? It shouldn't usually be focused on quality. I think it's talking to people. It's like not doing too much more than that's needed, right? The amount that you're going to need if you want to do something really big is going to be a lot. But it's like, are you doing too much more than you need that you'll look back in your life and say, well, I probably didn't need as much. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve. So when my book comes out, when I die, you guys will, you guys won't even be able to read the book. I'm sorry, damn. But that was the debrief, the first part. We got a lot more to go through, and this part we're just gonna talk about the different things of this book that was just kind of interesting. Can you get us started, Ben?
yeah, so to start us off, it's kind of an assortment of things, but we're going to start off in one of the best places, just knowledge. So I like this quote. This quote kind of hits. The genuine love for reading itself, when cultivated, is a superpower. Every book and every piece of knowledge ever written down is a fingertip away. The means of learning are abundant. It's the desire to learn that is scarce. So one of the foundational things is reading, is actually going out and learning, and just finding not depth, but also breadth in your knowledge, right? And if you look at like all successful people, you hear about like Warren Buffett. I hear about him like he just sits and he reads all day, right? Or you hear like Bill Gates. Like Bill Gates has read I don't know how many books, but like you can go like he's read a lot of books. Elon's read a lot of books. Like people who are successful, I think almost without fail, and there's definitely some exceptions, they almost all read, right? And that's not a coincidence. And people who are well read, they have a foundational, they have a good knowledge base to go off, and to be able to analyze and go and deal with anything, right? So the love for reading is one of the best things you can do for yourself, but it really has to be cultivated, right? A lot of us like these days, like we're like, oh, like I don't want to read, like that sounds so boring, and it's like, well, what are you reading? Like, what do you, like find a book that you like to read and read that. Like start somewhere where it's not so hard. I think Naval puts it, well, it's like read what you love until you love to read. So don't worry about what it is you're reading in particular. It might not be quote unquote like the best book to read or the most productive book to read, but it's like, who cares? Like a book is better than no book, right? It's, it's like at least going to the gym for 10 minutes a day is better than nothing, right? And eventually you can work up to a better workout. So you want to be reading a lot, try to cover a wide area of topics and get a wide knowledge base. But once you've cultivated your love for reading, so this is after you've read what you love and now you just like to read, you want to find foundational books. And foundational books, this is actually a really important point. I kind of like, I've taken this to heart, like pretty like hard myself. You want to find books that have really defined spheres of knowledge or different areas. They've really created the landscape of knowledge in a certain field as we know it today. So some examples would be like the origin of species. So Charles Darwin wrote that, and that like really defined a lot of biology in terms of evolution, right? Like that was a huge deal, right? Um, he mentioned some other books like The Wealth of Nations. That was a foundational text in economics written by Adam Smith. Um, so reading the foundational books, that actually allows you to really get a good base of your knowledge and analyze things from the ground up without being biased towards a certain thing. Because one thing that Naval mentions is that whatever you're reading first, that will give you a bias and perspective in terms of whatever you read after that, right? Because those are the ideas that are first embedded, and those are the ideas with you compare everything else against. So you want to find foundational knowledge and read foundational books because they are the most widely known. They're going to be hyperlinked in a lot of ways to a lot of different texts, but they're also what have really defined a lot of fields, and they're super useful. Last thing he says, take your time reading. Don't speed read, because it would be far better for you to understand 10 books extremely well than to just run through 100 books. Like you'll get way more out of sitting down and absorbing 10 books than you will if you just kind of skim through 100, because you're not going to remember anything from the 100. You really only remember a couple things from a book, and if you really absorb it, you'll remember more. But you really have to sit and think and wrestle with books, because that's where you learn. And Bruce Lee has a quote. He says, "I don't fear the man who knows 1,000 kicks and 1,000 punches. I fear the man who's practiced one punch 10,000 times or one kick 10,000 times." So kind of reinforcing the idea of like, go slow and really absorb the book and make sure that, once you love to read, make sure it's a good book, it's a foundational book, and always reread books as well. So the goal is to have foundations such that you can read any book. You want to be able to walk into a library and pick up any book and feel confident that you can understand it. And that's when you know you've achieved a large breadth of foundational knowledge that will be integral to going through life.
This section sounded personal, bro. Who are you mad at?
What's up?
So this section sounded personal. No, I'm kidding. But actually is, but
It's quite personal, Mel.
it
This
is.
is important. I need to make sure you guys read. This is important.
Now, reading is. There's a reason why every successful person reads. But don't fool yourself into reading. Read good stuff, and then you'll just start liking it. Now you understand. Probably the most important part. Reading is the foundation of knowledge. I mean, like, that's why they didn't allow people to read. If you think it's so crazy to think like people nowadays, we all can read. But I want to highlight to the last part of that quote from Naval. It's the desire to learn that is scarce. Back then, people could not read. Therefore, they did not have knowledge and they were being controlled. We have the ability to read. We have the ability to more information than any other civilization. But it's that desire to learn. That's what really gets you paid the most out in this world. But there is the foundations, like Ben talked about the books, but there's also foundational knowledge just in general. I'm gonna give you guys a high level of what are the main things you want to focus on, and then you can build from there. The ultimate foundation is logic and math. I'm doing it. That's all I'm saying. But so mathematics, and I'm gonna refer to it as mathematics. I'm not gonna say math because I'm a mathematics major now. So, but mathematics and logic are the basis through which you understand like everything else. And some people will be like, well, how it doesn't really apply to like life and certain things. You'll actually be very wrong. Because a lot of the times, like, yes, we intuitively understand things, but we don't know that we understand it until we can prove it with data. And so this is kind of like, do you want to understand the basis of the scientific method? Well, you need to develop a clear thinking. And a lot of times you're going to use math and logic to reason about it and be like, well, this is true because everything else I've thought of from the ground up, the foundation of it is true as well. And so the goal here is you want to separate the truth from falsehood. And an example of like just kind of this difference of like logic and having a good foundation of what you're learning compared to learning something that is woohoo is in the field of economics. So you want to study microeconomics because microeconomics is on a smaller scale. It's more predictable. You're talking about business. You're more on like a business to business scale. But you don't want to study macroeconomics because macroeconomics become very woohoo. So you're just like macroeconomics. You're trying to understand how do all the people in a certain region interact and how does the economy and money flow through that region. And as Naval likes to say, that's a lot of bullshit, you know. Or actually, this is I think Nassim Taleb. He calls it macro bullshit. But you can't, and the reason why is because like how you know something can be BS is you can't find two macroeconomic economists that agree on the same thing. It's almost like one views things one way and another, and that's because there is no foundation to go off of because you're trying to predict unpredictable people, and that is human for you. But so mathematics, mathematics and logic are like the foundation, right? Then we have to talk about the five most important skills. Number one, reading. Well, actually, I don't think there's really any order of these, but I'm just going to list them off. Reading, writing, arithmetic, which is mathematics. I just really like saying mathematics.
We can tell.
Fourth is persuasion and speaking, and fifth is programming. Reading, writing, arithmetic, persuasion and speaking, programming. If you're good with computers, if you're good at basic math, if you're good at writing, if you're good at speaking, and if you like reading, you will be set. So the topics you want to be reading and learning about, which are probably the most useful, especially when we're talking about business and just life in general. One is persuasion. And that's because you're going to deal with people every day. And if you're running a business, you're going to have to be able to persuade people to believe in the vision, persuade people to get work done, persuade people to buy your product. And this is not evil persuasion. This is sensible and ethical persuasion. Fourth is programming. I mean, in our generation, you got to be like, if you can program, you can start a business that is worth more than you can imagine. Microeconomics, it's vital for understanding business decisions, customers, and just understanding the economic landscape, especially if you're trying to run a business, because businesses happen in the micro. And obviously, if you grow to be a big business, maybe you can affect the macro. Game theory. Life is truly just game. Life is truly a game of games. There is the relationship, the money, the status. There's all types of these different games within this thing called life, which is a game. We even made a game about it called The Sims. So it's like
It's actually a game called Life.
there's a game called life. And so a meta skill here is just like understanding what skills is most important for the game that you want to play, the skills and principles that you need to know to play and win whichever game you want to. Psychology ties in heavy persuasion, but if you can understand people and understand why people act the way they do, and also psychology helps you understand yourself, very useful. Mathematics, and this is not like not calculus, you don't have to do all the crazy stuff.
Although calculus is really, really cool. Like you should learn it because it's like it's that deep. Honestly, it's insane. Sorry, I had to mention that.
And so the things that Naval mentions is basic arithmetic, fractions, quick mental math, and statistics. And statistics actually involves calculus as well. So calculus is just like one of those foundational math things. But it's highly useful in the business world and all that good stuff. Philosophy, this is where you get to understand more like life principles, how to live. It's important to think about these things because it makes you a more effective and better person. And it requires you to kind of take a step back and ask you like, what principles do you live by? And I'm about to go on a bit of a rant here. Do not waste your time getting a business degree. I'm sorry. I had to say that, okay? I'm sorry, all my business folks out there. If you already put the hours in, I hope you at least studied accounting or finance. Maybe you could make an argument for marketing, but I've met so many people that have gone into marketing that don't at all have any marketing, any type of experience. I'm not saying this to be mean, because business is not a skill. When you go to school, if you're gonna pay someone thousands of dollars to teach you something, you at least want them to teach you something that is a applicable skill. And people go, well, isn't this whole thing about business? Why wouldn't I just go learn about business? Business is one of those things where business encompasses a whole array of skills that we just talked about. And those skills are individual skills that are combined to make the business work. But business is a thing you do. It's not a thing you study. And so like you ask yourself like, what is a business degree teaching me, right? And if you're not learning one of like the core skills in business, like accounting or finance, everything else is just kind of like BS that the school has put out there to just capture people that want to study business, but that are shying away from the math of it, right? Because finance and accounting have math, and people go, well, I'm not a math person. Well, it's like, that's what you think. And that's truly what you think, and therefore that's what you are. And so, business schools do teach some good things, but a lot of it is it's bullshit. That's the word of the day. So don't study business as much. So to optimize learning, doing is faster than watching. You learn from experience, not intaking information. Don't get stuck in information paralysis where you're just reading, taking a lot of information about it, but you're not actually doing anything to make progress, right? Because it's one thing to read, but you don't understand how all that reading applies until you're actually in the moment and having to make those decisions. And so it's really important that you do it. And then last is reading is faster than listening. I love listening to podcasts. You're listening to this podcast right now. We really appreciate you. But reading is better because it forces you to really focus on what you're, learning about. When you're listening to a podcast, it's more of like a bypassing. And I view it as like not purely learning, but an exploration of ideas, because there might be something where we're kind of dazing off, and then they say something, you pay attention. Like when I said don't study business, maybe you're dazing off before I said that, and then I said don't study business. You could be one crowd that's like, yes, I made the right decision. You could be the other crowd like, what does this dude mean? So optimize your learning. Doing is faster than watching. Reading is faster than listening. So please take that into consideration.
I felt like you got a little personal there on the business one.
I very much did. I talk about this
funny.
so much on my TikTok. It's
Do you really?
Yeah, like people will just be like, what should I study? I'm like, dude, study something technical. Like, don't waste your time studying business when like you could read a couple business books and you'll probably get everything. Like there's MBA students out there that'll just be like, here's 25 books that literally cover everything I did in my MBA. Like in business, like the skill you probably learn the most is just like going out to network with people. But it's like, did you need to pay thousands of dollars just to do that?
Yeah, you don't need a degree to learn a lot of that stuff. If you're accounting and finance, those are technical parts of business, right? And those are good. But like, the reason you go to school is to like, because in all honesty, like who's teaching themselves like software engineering? Like it's just like it's really hard to get all those concepts, let alone to force yourself to learn all of them, especially with no like, a lot of it just seems like, it goes for a lot of STEM, but it's just like very technical things are very difficult to learn. So that's why the degree is extremely helpful. But it's like if you're learning like, management or something, it's like I don't think you need a degree to like figure out how to like not piss someone off. It's not.
It's like you in that management class is not going to learn how to manage people until you just go manage people.
And you could probably get the same or better or even updated information from like the latest book or something. Like you could just read a book on it and like you'd probably be good. Like.
Yeah, but
anyways,
the next skill.
Next thing is time management. Time management is extremely important, right? No one will value your time more than you. That is like one of the biggest things that's like such a powerful statement to me. Like no one will value your time more than you. So if you don't value it, literally no one will. And one thing that Naval does is he says to value your time at an hourly rate. And set this at a very high aspirational rate. I think my rate is actually $50K an hour. That's extremely aspirational. Mel's laughing at me right now. What's your rate?
It was like at 1,000 at first. I think I moved it up to like 5,000 now. So if you want me to do anything, you gotta, you better cough up 5,000 for an hour.
and the hourly rate is useful. It's not just some like, it's not just like some woo woo like thing you do. It's actually to help you understand what you should or shouldn't be doing. So you should use this hourly rate as a litmus test to see if you should be doing something. So for instance, I had a package from Amazon come in this past week, and the book I got was like, it was damaged. Like the outside, like it didn't look too good. And I was like, should I return the book and, get my $12 back? Or should I just live with the book? And then I was like, what's my hourly rate? Well, it's 50,000 an hour. I was like, is it worth me spending 45 minutes doing something I don't want to do for a book worth $12? I was like, no. And so it's decisions like that. It's like, should you be doing this compared to your hourly rate? And the answer for a lot of things is no. So like, for instance, do you have to return this? Do you have to do this? Can you pay someone else to do something for you? Could you deliver your groceries? Are you doing things that are trivial? Are you arguing with people? Your girlfriend, your friend, whatever. So things that just don't contribute to life at all. I would like to say that the hourly rate is not meant to be like, oh, I was having dinner with my parents and I lost 100,000 because I spent 2 hours with them. It's like, that's not really how it works. It's more of like, you have to start with a little bit of a balance, right? Like, there are some things you can't really put a price on, especially like, family and relationships. So it's like, you don't compare, you don't say like, oh, would my time be better spent doing something else that's productive versus like going out and having like dinner with my girlfriend or something or whatever, something like that, right? It's like, no, there are things, if you want to do something, then do it, right? If you don't want to do something though, then you should compare it to your hourly rate. And that's when it's useful. It's for things that you don't want to do, right? I like the way he says this. He says, you should be too busy to do coffee. This is important. Like, if you shouldn't have like an abundant amount of, you should have a lot of time in your schedule, but you should be too busy such that if someone's like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, and it's not really someone you know that well, and like they just want to grab coffee, it's like, well, why do you want to grab coffee? Like, are we getting a meeting or something? Or it's like, what are, if someone just wants a little bit of your time, be very ruthless with how you are giving out your time, because Naval says this, you can, death by 1,000 cuts. If you're constantly giving out 15, 30-minute slices of your time, then your time you're going to lose all of it and you're going to be really unproductive, right? So you need to be basically too busy, as he says, to do coffee, right? So if something's not extremely important, then you really just shouldn't be doing it. And here's a quote by Naval. He says, if you think you're going to make it by networking and attending a bunch of meetings, you're probably wrong. Networking can be important early in your career, and you can get serendipitous with meetings, but the odds are pretty low. And so this is a bit of a separate thought, but he kind of goes on about networking and meetings in particular, right? And the reason he kind of hates on networking is because it relies on luck. It doesn't rely on specific knowledge. You're relying on meeting the right person instead of just relying on creating the unique character that you could be, right? And meetings are terrible. I read a lot about Tim Ferriss in a lot of his books and his podcasts, and he kind of just rants about meetings because you often never get anything done. If there's more than like 4 people in the room, like you're probably not even contributing to the conversation. Nothing is going to get done in a productive way, and often you don't even have a clear goal of what the meeting is for. So networking can be important. I know Mel was like, I'm terrible at networking. So when Naval said that, I was like, thank God. Like, I don't have to network. Like, that's just, but meetings, be careful of meetings. And the last thing, people really underrate this. You need to have space in your life. You need to have time, and specifically alone time as well, to really sit and think and recuperate, right? If you are constantly busy, if you never have even a few hours, maybe on a Sunday or something, to just sit down and think about who you are, where you're going, and why you want to go there, you will never be able to go in the right place, right? You should be constantly updating who it is that you are and what you're trying to do, because you're getting new information constantly. And that will allow you, because you're constantly getting new information, especially like for Mel and I, because we're so young, if you're trying to figure out who you are and where you're trying to go, that will constantly be changing, even if it's only in small steps. And if you never have any space to think about that, you will never actually find out who you are or where you'd like to go. So you really need space that allows for clear thinking and things of like that nature. So
Time management is one of the greatest skills. We all have the same 158, 168 hours
yeah.
in the week, and Elon Musk can run like 8 companies. So think about that and feel bad for yourself. Well, don't feel bad for yourself. You should have pity.
Let that inspire you.
Feel bad for yourself. No, but in all seriousness, hard work is important. You got to work hard. We all know this. I'm not saying anything new. But what's far more important is what you work on and who you work with. So this is related to the function you're using. You can input 100 into f of x equals x, but someone can input 50 into f of x equals x squared and get more than you. So it's what you work on and who you work on with is what's really really important here. So work as hard as you can, but you want to remember the 2 points above. You can work as hard as possible and still fail at what you're doing because you're working on the wrong thing or with the wrong people, and especially the people, because a lot of times someone might want to start a business, but they just will look for someone to just start a business with. It's like, well, you don't know much about that person besides the fact that both of y'all want to do this one thing. So spend time to understand the people that you potentially really want to work with. This is something like they really stress about in like all these different like startup things that I've been listening to. And so you won't get anywhere if you don't work hard, but you won't get anywhere good if you don't pick the right people or the right things to work on. So the point here is that there's no get rich quick schemes. Hard work is crucial, but you will fail if you do not get if you don't get what you work on or who you work with correct. So this is the part where judgment comes in really really clutch.
And so now we're going to recap the past two episodes because it's been a lot of information. The first, we kind of went over understanding the foundations of wealth. So, understanding that wealth creation is highly ethical. If you're growing the pie, that's good for not only you, but society as a whole.
It can be ethical because there's still those that can like do it unethically, but
I mean, I think the way we defined it, wealth creation is definitionally not including unethical means of gaining money. But yeah. Um, Second thing, you can't get rich on a salary. You must own equity. You must have ownership. Because without ownership, your inputs and outputs are highly connected. And if you work 8 hours, you get 8 hours of salary. All good things come from compound interest, and that's extremely important because you must think long term for compound interest to work. So those kind of the foundations there. The second thing was finding and applying specific knowledge. So we talked about creating a unique character such that luck finds you, right? You don't want to find luck. You want to have luck find you. And the way that's done is by being authentic to yourself. No one can compete with you on you, just like you can't compete with anyone else on them. So don't try to be anyone else because you really won't. You won't win. You have to be yourself. And then the last thing on that part was learn to build, learn to sell, and Naval says you'll be unstoppable. Third thing is leverage and accountability. So you want to be as accountable for as much as possible, which definitionally means taking risk, because taking risk is what allows you to build credibility and reputation. And that accountability is what gets you the leverage you need. So you want to start with code and media because they're permissionless and have zero cost of replication. And they have highly disconnected inputs and outputs with the leverage. But eventually you will need labor and capital. And so that's where the accountability is really important, to get other people to give you their labor and capital. And the last thing is you want to cultivate judgment, because once you have the leverage, you will need to make the best decisions to actually make use of that leverage. And if you're making bad decisions, you will compound them with the leverage. So that's not good. Finally, we talked about foundations. Learn to love to read, because reading is the foundation of all learning. And that is really what we're about, not only this podcast, but really as people. Continuous learning, continuous improvement is what you're striving for. The things you should be reading about once you love to read. Naval says study microeconomics, game theory, persuasion, programming, math, logic, philosophy, and ethics. Last thing, make sure to manage your time well, because no one will value your time more than you. Finishing all this off, Mel, you look tired. You good?
yeah.
Be an artist. And Naval says this, meaning that an artist is someone who does something for the sake of doing something, right? If you are doing something because you're simply trying to achieve something, you won't be doing it the best. You want to be doing something because you enjoy doing that thing. That will produce the best results, and it will also allow you to lead a fulfilling and successful life while you're pursuing your goals, right? So keep redefining what you do and who you are until you become an artist. All right, that concludes the information. Now we're just going to debrief, and that'll be all for how to get rich.
And that was a great recap. Covered everything that was really vital in the how to get rich. So, debrief me.
I'll start us off. When and how did you come to love to read?
It's probably. So I didn't. This is interesting because junior year I enjoyed reading like it was like some philosophical ones, just like poetry over like uh transcendentalism, naturalism, existentialism,
Yeah.
and all stuff like that. So I enjoyed those readings, but all the other readings that you're forced to kind of read in school, like being forced to do anything will make you like it. So I didn't start really like reading until it probably really wasn't until this last summer when we decided like really start, like I always wanted to start reading. Like I think freshman year I realized like, okay, all these successful people read and like I enjoy learning and the best way to learn is probably just to read the book itself. And I didn't mind, like I enjoyed reading some of the textbooks for my classes. I'd be like, oh, this is kind of interesting. When you read it, you're like, I'm enjoying this read. It's just like this time pressure and this stuff
Right.
behind it that made it unenjoyable because you're like, I have to do this when it's like you should want to do it. But so like what really made me start like fully be like, okay, and I need to make sure I'm making more time for it is when we started to do it for the podcast, but we were doing it for the podcast because we're doing it for ourselves. And so it was that moment of doing it for yourself that made me be like, okay, reading is cool. But I know you've been on it before me. When did it click for you?
I think it clicked around like senior year of high school. It was like I had always been really interested in reading things that were like useful or like just intrinsically interesting to me.
Yeah.
So a lot of that was like health related, finance related, even to some extent like philosophy. But anything else, I was kind of like I was like school books. I was like that's boring. But then it clicked, and I was like, oh, this is really like. I started reading more, started to really enjoy what I was reading, and then it was like, once you find yourself like looking forward to reading on like a Friday night or something, like that's when you know you've found it. Kind of half kidding, but also like not. But yeah, it's mostly just like I started reading things like Naval said, that I was just curious about, and then I realized not only how useful it was, but just how impactful each of the books that I had read had been and how useful they had been. And so like seeing that play out in my life, it was so motivational to really push me to go back and read more books. And then you see like really how interconnected a lot of books are and how interconnected the web of ideas are. And that's really it's really awe inspiring in a lot of ways. And it motivates me to read a lot more than I used to.
It makes you realize that like we are really building off of the ideas of people to like keep pushing humans further. What makes you like think what is the reason why you think people don't read? Because most people don't.
I think it's actually just as simple as like energy expenditure. Like I think people want to do the thing that is easiest, and reading does require a solid amount of focus and concentration. And it's like after a long day, that focus and concentration to some extent will always feel not pleasant, right? At least initially. And so it's like it's much easier to just go watch TV or literally anything else, or just screw off, and that those things have their time and place. But reading is energy intensive in a lot of ways, because if you're really engaged with the book, you're expending a lot of energy thinking about it. And if you're curious, that doesn't that's not bad at all. But if you're really just not into it, it's like I don't want to do that. It feels like work. I think it's as simple as that. But wouldn't any thoughts on that? Or
Not really. I guess it's just differentiating reading from work and pleasure,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes that pleasure it's not 50 shades of gray. It doesn't have to be that. It's like pleasure of like learning something that you want to learn and you find pleasure in that.
Right.
And my like last question for this talk is: did any of the foundational knowledge surprise you when you first heard it?
These five?
The five, maybe something
I got you.
related.
I so the one that really threw me off was game theory. Talked about game theory, and like when he explained it, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But I would never have guessed that. Like if you had asked me to write down a few things that I think are like foundational skills, no matter what you do, I would never have put game theory. That just never came to my mind. Because I think math. I mean, I like math because I think it's really interesting. So I think, but just the way basic arithmetic, basic understanding of like how, basically allowing you to understand, microeconomics, finance, things like that. So you can actually operate in the business world. Like I think that was pretty intuitive to me, as well as like speaking, writing, reading. That all seemed to, I was like, yeah, I probably would have written those things down. But the game theory was like, oh, like that's a different idea because, like a game is just like an arena where there's like certain rules, and if you break the rules, you don't get to play the game, or there's a consequence because of the rule. And it's like that's kind of like that's what life is in a lot of ways, as we've discussed, and but it's like life is so complex, and so if you understand the complexities of game theory, you have this kind of meta skill where you can go around and really operate in an effective manner, no matter what sub game of life you're playing, because you understand the tactics that work across all games. And it's like that hit me because I was like, well, yeah, that's really, really useful.
Wait, say that again, because the sub game, go back to that sub game part, and hold on.
Like what part?
The part about you saying like you can take the ideas from different games and apply it to different ones. Generalize it.
Yeah, there's like, because game theory is just the abstraction of what works the best no matter what game you're playing, right? So it's like if you understand the tactics and the strategies that work in every game, well then it's like you can pick any sub games. Like no matter what game you're playing, you at least have a base of knowledge that starts you off from the jump better than anyone else in that arena, at least. And so that was really, when he said that, when I got that, I was like, yeah, that's way more powerful than I would have ever thought, even once he first said it.
Yeah.
But the other ones made sense. Philosophy and ethics. I mean, the philosophy is just like how to live in a lot of ways, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then persuasion and psychology, like that's just, I mean, you're going to deal with people. You have to deal with yourself at least every day, every second of every day, right? And then you're going to deal with people for a lot of that as well. So it's like, if you don't understand the people and yourself, like, I don't, if you don't think that's important, then I got nothing for you. So that's, but what do you think about that? Was there anything that surprised you, or is there anything that you think shouldn't be on the list, maybe?
Because I agree with you. Game theory was an interesting one. And it made me be like, all right, I'm adding this class, taking it. And yeah, I really like the way you framed it. Just being able to understand what generally works in most games, applying it to different things. And one of the interesting things he talked about from probably the most important model that he learned from like game theory was like the principal agent problem of like, the principal is like the person that like owns the thing, and the agent is the one that like works for the person that owns that thing. And like usually like those two have to be aligned or things go completely messed up. And so like I would look further into that because that's actually a really like applicable thing, and I'm still fully trying to grasp it. But things that I don't think should be on there, like if you like when I read this and when I heard it all, like I was like, these are all 100%. Like,
is there anything that's not on here that you think, not that he might have necessarily missed, but it's like, it's at it's one of the, it was a close cut. Like you think it could be on here if you just expanded the scope a little bit. Also, I think his emphasis on microeconomics was that took me off guard. Maybe it's because I learned micro in high school. I took like 2 years of economics in high school, so it was kind of like when he said that, because I mean economics is really interesting, but I never looked at it and was like, this is a foundational concept. And then I was like, maybe when he explained it, I was like, I'll have to relook into this and see what I think. I think the jury is still out, in my opinion, on like how quote unquote foundational it is. But he does emphasize it quite a bit. He talks about microeconomics a lot. So
Yeah. I think that list covers everything. Like there's
Okay.
like literally if
I
you
got
add
you.
anything else, like anything else is a subset of everything. And I think microeconomics is what is the skill that business people think they're gonna get when they major in business. Because like microeconomics is social and like the business aspect of it.
Yeah.
That's what economics is. It's like the social
Right.
understanding of it. And so it's like you need to like because what is an organization? It's people working together towards something for a financial incentive. And so microeconomics encompasses that, and that's why it is the foundational. And that's why it's like the people that study econ are more, in my opinion, more useful than someone that studies management because it's like you can contribute.
I don't even know if that's that. I don't think that's disputed.
It's like, hey, you just finished management. Go manage these people. You don't know how to do that. I think the recap excuses you from the recap.
bet that.
So we'll end the day with a really good quote. All right. This is from Naval, Ravikant. You need to start putting who says these quotes because you don't put it anywhere else besides the last one.
My bad.
But all right.
That's why you have me here, though, right?
No. When you're finally wealthy, you realize it wasn't what you were seeking in the first place. But that is for another day. And that is truly another day that we will talk about his happiness section in the book. The happiness section, this is where the Armelicus Melius, the Benicus.
Oh, no.
But this is where we get to twiddle around some higher level ideas of what is happiness. Is happiness even a thing? Should you aim for happiness? Why shouldn't you? Or,
Yeah. I think it's close. I think I like his happiness more than I like his how to get rich part of the book, because the book has two parts, just so you guys know, and the happiness is the second part. It's a little shorter. In the podcast it's much shorter, but it's jam packed with a lot of really good philosophy, I guess, or really like just solid life advice.
And that's to tell you guys that his How to Get Rich section is probably one of the best things you can read in terms of a high but specific. It's a high level but also specific explanation of like what to do to actually be successful. And that's really, really good. One of the best. But the happiness is just something where it's like his perspective and the way he aggregates the information is so good that a lot of times you might not have heard. You probably would not have heard most of the things that he will say or thought about it in that way. So I highly recommend you read it. But if you want to wait till the pod comes out, that's probably going to be a while because we're going to take a break from it because that's something that we'll need to really, really dive into.
Yeah.
So this has been a long episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Is there anything you want to leave off with, Ben?
Just appreciate y'all listening.
With all that being said, we love y'all. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for being a part of the AOD family. Make sure you follow us. We're going to stay busy. Till next time. Peace.